The day my brother walked out of the mediator's office with his fist in the air, I stood in the hallway and said nothing. My lawyer grabbed my arm. "You understand what you just did?" she said. "You handed him everything." I nodded. "You're not even going to fight for the shop?" "No," I said. "Let him have it." She stared at me for a long moment. Then she opened her mouth, closed it again, and shook her head like she was trying to dislodge something stuck inside. I picked up my bag, thanked her for her time, and walked to my car alone. My brother Marcus was still celebrating in the parking lot when I drove past. He had his phone out calling someone, probably his wife. I could see him laughing through the windshield. Big, open laugh. The kind he used to give when we were kids and he'd beaten me at something. I kept driving. That was a Tuesday in March. By Friday, his lawyer had called mine 3 times. Let me start at the beginning because none of this makes sense without it. My father built Callaway Hardware from nothing. That is not a figure of speech. He started it in 1991 with a leased storefront in Decatur, Georgia, $12,000 he'd saved over 4 years working for someone else's lumberyard, and a handshake deal with a local contractor who promised to send business his way. By the time I was born, the shop had a second location. By the time I was 10, there were 3. Dad wasn't a complicated man, but he was a thorough one. He kept every receipt, he filed every permit, he renewed every license before the reminder notice even arrived. He used to say that the difference between a business that lasts and one that doesn't isn't talent or luck, it's paperwork. The boring stuff, he'd tell Marcus and me when we'd sit behind the counter doing homework on slow afternoons. The boring stuff is what holds everything together. Marcus hated the boring stuff. He was 7 years older than me, charming in a way that made people forgive things they shouldn't. And he had decided somewhere around age 19 that his destiny was bigger than hardware. He went to Atlanta for college, then stayed for a decade working in sales for a medical device company. He was good at it. He made real money. He came home for Christmas and Thanksgiving and sometimes called on Dad's birthday, and that was mostly the shape of our relationship with him, present in the way that a photograph is present. You know it's there. You just don't interact with it. I stayed. That wasn't a sacrifice I made dramatically, it was just what happened. I went to community college nearby, studied business administration, came back and started working the register at the Decatur shop when I was 22. Dad taught me the inventory system, then the vendor relationships, then the books. When he had his first heart attack at 64, I was already running the day-to-day. When he had his second one 2 years later, and the doctor said he needed to step back completely, the transition was seamless because there was nothing to transition. I was already there. Marcus flew in after the second heart attack, stayed 4 days, told Dad he really needed to think about succession, and flew back to Atlanta. I remember standing in the kitchen after he left, washing dishes while Dad sat at the table with his oxygen monitor on his finger, and neither of us said anything for a long time. "He means well," Dad said eventually. "I know," I said. And I did know. That was always the frustrating thing about Marcus. He wasn't cruel. He was just absent, and then suddenly present, and somehow those 2 things never added up to the same thing as just being there. Dad updated his will 18 months before he died. He did it with full mental clarity at the office of an estate attorney named Patricia Wren, who had handled his affairs for 20 years. I know this because I drove him there, sat in the waiting room, and later, much later, read every word of the resulting document. The will divided the estate into 2 portions. The house and personal assets went to my mother, which was straightforward. The business, all 3 locations, the real property on which 2 of them sat, the inventory, the equipment, the accounts, was left jointly to Marcus and me, with a clause specifying that if either party wished to buy out the other, they had right of first refusal. I remember reading that and feeling something tighten in my chest. Not because I thought it was wrong. Dad loved Marcus. Of course he did. But I knew, in the way you know things about your own family that you've never said out loud, that this was going to be complicated. Dad died on a Thursday morning in October, peacefully, at home, with my mother and me on either side of him. Marcus made it in time to say goodbye. I'll give him that. He was there for the last 2 hours, and whatever happened afterward, I won't take that away from him. The funeral was on a Sunday. Marcus stayed through the following Wednesday. By Friday, he'd emailed me with a subject line that read, "Dad's business, next steps." The email was polite. That was the thing. It was very polite, and that somehow made it worse. He said he'd been thinking carefully about the situation and had spoken to a financial advisor who agreed that the most sensible path forward was a clean division of assets. He proposed that I take the Decatur location, the original store, the smallest one, the one with the oldest equipment and the lease that was up for renewal in 14 months. And he would take the 2 newer locations, including the one in Marietta that sat on property Dad had owned outright. He said this was equitable given the revenue split and fair to both parties going forward. I sat with that email for 2 days before I responded. I talked to my mother, who said she didn't want to get in the middle of it. I talked to a friend from college who told me to get a lawyer immediately. I talked to nobody else because there was nobody else to talk to about this particular kind of thing. Then I called my lawyer, the same Patricia Wren who had drawn up Dad's will, and I told her everything. Patricia is in her late 60s, small, and has the kind of stillness that makes you feel like she has seen every version of this story before and is simply waiting for you to catch up. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "Do you want to fight him? Or do you want to resolve this?" "I want to understand what I'm dealing with first," I said. "Smart," she said. "Come in Thursday." What Patricia laid out for me over the next several weeks was not simple. The business, as Dad had built it, was healthy on the surface. The 3 locations turned a collective profit. The brand had 40 years of goodwill in the community. On paper, Marcus's proposed split might have looked generous to someone who didn't look closely, but I had been running those books for 3 years. I knew things Marcus didn't. The Marietta location, the one Marcus wanted, sat on property that came with a commercial lease agreement Dad had signed in 2019. That agreement contained a clause that made the lessee responsible for structural maintenance and a prorated share of a planned municipal infrastructure project affecting the street in front of the building. The city had been slow-walking that project for years. Dad had known about it. It was in a folder in the filing cabinet labeled in his handwriting, "Marietta. Read before any transfer." I had read it. The assessment, when it finally came due, was going to be somewhere between $40,000 and $70,000 depending on final project scope. There was also deferred HVAC maintenance Dad had kept pushing back, a vendor contract with a net 90 payment term that had created a slow building accounts payable balance, and a piece of equipment at the Smyrna location that was technically listed as an asset but had been non-functional for 8 months and was going to cost more to repair than replace. None of this made the business bad, but it made it complicated, and it made Marcus's equitable proposal look very different under the right light. I told Patricia about all of it. She looked at me over her reading glasses for a moment. "Does Marcus know about any of this?" "I don't think so," I said. "He hasn't asked." She nodded slowly. "And what do you want to do?" I thought about it for a long time before I answered. "I want out," I said finally. "I've been carrying mess for 3 years. Mom is taking care of. I want to be done." "You could fight for the 2 better locations," she said. "With your operating history and the will's right of first refusal clause, you have standing." "I know," I said, "but I'm tired of fighting people I used to love." She didn't say anything. "I want a clean exit," I said. "I want everything documented, and I want it done right." Marcus and I went back and forth for 2 months through our respective lawyers. He had hired someone from Atlanta, a younger guy named Derek, who sent aggressive emails and used a lot of financial terminology that I think was meant to sound intimidating. He made a formal offer he would buy me out of my share of the 2 newer locations at a valuation he'd had done by someone I'd never heard of. The number was lower than fair market. He justified it by arguing that the Decatur store, which he was ceding to me, carried sentimental value that offset the difference. I read that line 3 times. My mother called me that night and asked how things were going. I told her they were progressing. She said Marcus had told her it was almost settled. I said that was true in a way. "You're not telling me something," she said. "I'm handling it," I said. "I promise." She was quiet for a moment. Your father trusted you with that business for a reason, she said. Don't let anyone tell you differently. I said I wouldn't. The mediation was scheduled for a Tuesday at a neutral office in Midtown Atlanta. The night before, I sat at my kitchen table with every document Patricia had helped me compile over the previous 6 weeks: the municipal assessment notice, the HVAC service records, the vendor payment ledger, the equipment depreciation schedule, the Marietta lease with every relevant clause flagged. I also had something else, a spreadsheet I'd built myself, going back 38 months, documenting every hour I had worked at those stores, every vendor call I'd made, every tax filing I'd handled, every emergency I'd managed alone while Marcus was in Atlanta living his life. Patricia had told me I might not need all of it. I brought it anyway. The mediation room had a long table, 2 pitchers of water, and not enough light. Marcus came in with Derek and sat across from me. He looked competent, which I understood. He thought this was essentially settled. He thought the last 2 months of back and forth had just been my lawyer doing her due diligence before I accepted his terms. He smiled at me across the table. Hey, Ellie. I said hello. Derek launched into his opening position. I watched Marcus while Derek talked, watched him lean back slightly in his chair, watched the ceiling, check his phone once before the mediator gave him a look. He wasn't even paying attention. He'd already won this in his head. When Derek finished, Patricia looked at me. I gave her a small nod. And then I said, "We agree to the proposed division." Marcus blinked. Derek stopped shuffling his papers. "We agree," I said again. Marcus takes the Marietta and Smyrna locations with all associated assets. I take the Decatur location and the original equipment. We divide the operating accounts equally as of the date of transfer. Marcus assumes all liabilities associated with the locations he's receiving. I watched Derek's face. Something moved across it. Not alarm, exactly, but a quickening. He looked down at the documents in front of him. Marcus was still looking at me. "That's it? That's what you want?" "That's what I want," I said. Marcus laughed a little, quietly, the way people do when they're surprised and relieved at the same time. "Okay," he said. "Okay, yeah, we can do that." Derek had stopped looking at me and was now reading something. I saw his hand go still on the page. Patricia, to her credit, simply folded her hands and said, "We'll prepare the transfer documentation." The documents took 3 weeks to finalize. During that time, Derek called Patricia twice. The first call was professional, just clarifying language around the liability assumption clause, he said. The second call was less professional. Patricia relayed it to me afterward with a careful neutrality that I suspected was costing her some effort. Derek had found the municipal assessment notice. He'd also, apparently, finally read the Marietta lease in full. He wanted to renegotiate. Patricia told him the agreement had been reached in mediation, was documented and signed by both parties, and that his client had been represented by counsel throughout. She said this very pleasantly. He called a third time. She didn't return it. Marcus called me directly on a Thursday evening, which surprised me. We hadn't spoken on the phone, just the 2 of us, in over a year. "Hey," he said. "Hey," I said. There was a pause. "Derek says there's a situation with the Marietta property. The municipal assessment," I said. Silence. "I knew about that," I said. "I've known about it for a while. It was in a folder in the filing cabinet. Dad labeled it himself." Another silence, longer this time. "Ellie," he said. And his voice was different now. The confidence was gone. He sounded, for the first time in this whole ordeal, like my brother. "Why didn't you tell me?" I thought about that question. I thought about the email with the subject line, "Dad's business." Next steps, sent 4 days after we buried our father. I thought about the valuation from someone I'd never heard of. I thought about the phrase "sentimental value" used to justify an unfair number. I thought about 38 months of vendor calls and tax filings and emergencies managed alone. "Marcus," I said, "you didn't ask." He didn't say anything for a long time. "The assessment is the biggest piece," I said, "but it's not the only thing. The HVAC at Smyrna needs full replacement, not repair, replacement. The vendor balance at Marietta is going to come due in about 60 days. And the equipment inventory you were given credit for includes a floor saw that hasn't worked since last February. I have all of it documented. It's all in the files. Dad kept meticulous records. "Why are you telling me this now?" he said. "Because you're my brother," I said. "And because I'm not trying to destroy you, I just need it out." Another long silence. "The assessment," he said finally. "How bad is it?" "Worst case, 68,000. There's a payment plan option. I'd look into that first." I heard him exhale. "The HVAC quotes are in the Smyrna files, in the drawer under the register. I got 3 of them. The middle one is the most reasonable. Hendricks HVAC, they've done work for us before, they know the system." I paused. Dad trusted them. Marcus was quiet for so long I thought the call had dropped. "I'm sorry," he said finally, "about the email, about the valuation, about—" He stopped. "I should have been here more." "Yeah," I said, "you should have. Are you going to be okay with just the Decatur store?" I almost laughed. Decatur was the original. It had the steadiest customer base, the lowest overhead, the lease I'd already pre-negotiated for renewal at a locked rate. It had the accounts I'd built personally over 3 years. It had the community that had watched Dad build something from nothing and had kept coming back for 40 years. "I'll be fine," I said. "I want to tell you what the last few months have looked like, because I think it matters. I reopened the Decatur store under a new name, Callaway & Kellway, keeping Dad's name but making it mine. I repainted the front. I hired back 2 of the part-time employees who'd been uncertain about their futures during the dispute. I called every vendor and had honest conversations about terms. I renegotiated 2 contracts that Dad had let go stale because he hadn't had the energy in his last years to push back. The store turned a profit in its 2nd month under the new structure. Marcus is managing the other 2 locations. It hasn't been easy for him. I know this because my mother talks to both of us and doesn't always filter carefully. The municipal assessment came in at 54,000, which was better than worst case but still real money. He arranged a payment plan. He replaced the HVAC. He called Hendricks. He called me once to tell me they'd been exactly as reasonable as I'd said. I told him Dad had good judgment about people. "He did," Marcus said. "We didn't say much else, but it was different than before. There's a version of a relationship that isn't close, isn't warm, but is honest, where both people finally know where they stand. I think that's what Marcus and I have now. It's not what I would have chosen, but it's real, and after everything, real feels like enough." People ask me sometimes, mostly online, in comment sections or messages, whether I regret not fighting harder, whether I should have pushed for the 2 locations I had every legal right to contest for, whether I let him win. I understand why the question comes up. On the surface, it looks like I walked away from more valuable assets to take the smaller share. But here's what I've learned from 3 years of running a business my father built and 1 year of running one I'm building myself. The value of something isn't just what it's worth on paper. It's what it costs to carry it. It's the maintenance schedule and the vendor relationships and the municipal notice and the filing cabinet that someone has to read and understand and act on. It's the boring stuff. Dad used to say the boring stuff is what holds everything together. I think what he meant was the people who do the boring stuff are what hold everything together. And eventually, the weight of what you've taken settles on you and you find out whether you were ready to carry it. Marcus is carrying it now. I think he'll be okay. He's smarter than he acted during those first months after Dad died. And I think grief does strange things to people who weren't there enough and then suddenly have to reckon with what that means. I'm not angry anymore. I'm not sure I was ever angry, exactly. More exhausted, more invisible, more tired of being the one who stayed while staying went unnoticed. Now I open the Decatur store at 7 in the morning. I make coffee in the back office, the same coffee maker Dad used for 15 years, the same brand he always bought. I go through the previous day's numbers. I check in with the staff. I do the boring stuff. And some mornings I sit at that old counter and I can almost feel him at the other end of it. Not saying anything, just there, the way he always was when we were kids doing homework on slow afternoons. That's enough. That's more than enough. If you've ever been the one who stayed, the one who showed up, who kept the files, who learned the system, who did the work while someone else made bigger plans from a safe distance, I want you to know that I see you. The law doesn't always see you. Family gatherings don't always see you. But the business does. The accounts do. The vendors who've worked with you for years do. And eventually, the documents do. Make sure you read them.